In August 2021, a ship left the port of Los Angeles. Not a small vessel, not a regional ferry. The Maersk Essex, 1,200 feet long, carrying 13,092 containers stacked 9 stories high, pointed its bow west across the Pacific Ocean. Inside those containers, electronics, furniture, clothing, medical equipment. Goods ordered, goods expected. Goods that people were waiting for. The route was standard, calculated, optimized down to the hour. Los Angeles to Yokohama, Yokohama to Xiamen, Xiamen to Vietnam, Vietnam to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Yantian. Then back across the Pacific, 17,000 miles, back to Los Angeles. At every port, cranes swung into position. Containers were lifted off, new ones loaded on. The schedule held. The system worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. By October 2021, the Maersk Essex had completed one of the most complex logistical operations on the planet without a single significant breakdown. Then, it reached Los Angeles. 5 miles from the dock, the ship stopped. Not because of engine failure, not because of weather, not because anyone on board made a mistake. The Maersk Essex anchored offshore and waited. 1 day, 5 days, 10 days, 17 days. A ship carrying over 13,000 containers, a floating city of goods already paid for, already sold, already promised, sat 5 miles from its destination for 17 days. And here is the part that should bother you. This was not a malfunction. This was the system working exactly as designed.
To understand what happened to the Maersk Essex, you first need to understand what global shipping actually is. It is not a network of independent ships moving freely between ports. It is a precisely timed relay system, and every single piece depends on every other piece. When the Maersk Essex arrived at Los Angeles, it needed a berth, a specific docking position with cranes capable of handling its size. Those berths were occupied. Ships ahead of it hadn't finished unloading. Those ships were slow because there weren't enough dock workers to run full operations. Fewer workers meant slower cranes. Slower cranes meant longer berth occupation. Longer berth occupation meant the next ship waited at anchor. The Maersk Essex was not the exception. At peak congestion in late 2021, over 80 container ships sat anchored off the California coast simultaneously. So the explanation seems straightforward. Pandemic, labor shortage, demand spike, temporary disruption. A system under unusual stress. Stressed, but not broken. Wait until it gets here. Because here is what that explanation gets wrong. The congestion at Los Angeles was not caused by the pandemic. The pandemic revealed something the system had been building toward for 30 years. Go back to the 1990s. Container ships were large, but manageable. A vessel carrying 4,000 containers could be processed in a reasonable window. Ports were sized for those ships. Infrastructure matched the load. Then the economics of scale took over. Shipping companies discovered that larger ships dramatically reduced cost per container. A ship carrying 13,000 containers doesn't cost 3 times as much to operate as a ship carrying 4,000 containers. It costs maybe 40% more. The math was obvious. Build bigger ships, move more cargo per voyage, charge less per box, win the market. So the ships got bigger, and bigger, and bigger. But ports did not get bigger at the same rate. Cranes were upgraded. Berths were deepened. But the fundamental processing capacity, the number of containers a port could move per hour, per day, per week, could not keep pace with ship size. Here is what that created. When a 4,000 container ship arrived late, a port absorbed the disruption. The backlog was manageable. Other ships could be reshuffled. The system had slack. When a 13,000 container ship arrives late, when the Maersk Essex arrives late, the port doesn't absorb the disruption. The port transmits it. One delayed megaship blocks a berth for days instead of hours. Every ship behind it shifts. Every schedule downstream breaks. The containers sitting in that ship's hold, bound for warehouses, factories, retail stores across the country, are frozen in place. You thought the Maersk Essex was delayed by congestion. The Maersk Essex was delayed because it was designed to cause congestion. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but structurally, inevitably, as a direct consequence of the logic that built it in the first place. The ship exists because efficiency demanded it, and the 17-day wait exists because that same efficiency removed every buffer the system needed to survive disruption. Ask yourself the question that changes everything. If a ship this size can hold an entire port hostage for 17 days, what happens when 2 ships are delayed? What happens when a port on the other side of the world goes offline? What happens when the system hits a disruption it was never designed to absorb? You already know the answer. You watched it happen. Empty shelves, 6-month delivery windows, prices doubling overnight. This wasn't a supply chain crisis. This was a supply chain doing exactly what it was built to do, until the moment it couldn't.
Here is the structural reality underneath all of it. 10 shipping companies control approximately 85% of global container capacity. This is not a market. This is infrastructure. And it behaves the way all concentrated infrastructure behaves. It is extraordinarily efficient when everything works, and extraordinarily fragile when anything doesn't. When the Maersk Essex waited offshore for 17 days, that delay did not stay on the water. Every day of anchorage meant containers not reaching warehouses. Containers not reaching warehouses meant factories pausing production lines. Paused production lines meant orders not fulfilled. Unfulfilled orders meant retailers raising prices on whatever inventory remained. One ship, 5 miles from shore, 17 days. The downstream effect touched industries and consumers who had never heard of the Maersk Essex and had no idea why the thing they ordered wasn't arriving. That is the architecture. That is how it actually works. The system is not designed for resilience. It is designed for throughput. Maximum cargo, minimum cost, minimum time. Every redundancy that was stripped out to achieve that efficiency is a buffer that no longer exists when something goes wrong. The ships cannot get smaller. The economics won't allow it. The ports cannot double their capacity in a year. The infrastructure won't permit it. The companies that built this system are not going to rebuild it. The margins depend on it staying exactly this way. Which means every business that imports goods, every retailer that promises delivery dates, every consumer who expects a package to arrive is operating inside a system that has no ability to absorb the next disruption. Not the same disruption, a different one. A port closure, a canal blockage, a labor action, a weather event, a geopolitical shift. The trigger will be different. The structure of what happens next will be identical. On day 17, the Maersk Essex finally moved. A berth opened. The ship was guided in. Cranes swung into position and began unloading 13,000 containers, one by one. Within days, the cargo was moving again, onto trucks, into warehouses, toward the shelves and doorsteps where it had been expected weeks earlier. The system recovered. It always recovers. But recovery is not the same as stability. The Maersk Essex crossed 17,000 miles without a problem because the system was performing exactly as designed. It stopped for 17 days for the exact same reason. That is not a contradiction. That is the system showing you what it actually is.